Hi everyone, Michael here, Christ of England. Today I want to talk about how not to be depressed about the state of the United Kingdom and the importance of an eternal perspective. So let's go. Okay, so online, obviously I follow a lot of the stuff going on in the United Kingdom and people trying to sort the country out. And obviously a lot of people are depressed about the state of the nation. And our nation is an absolute mess, whether it's the economy, whether it's the problems with immigration, Islamic terrorism, work life, and the cost of living is extremely stressful. Crime is out of control. And all of us know there's something very bad. Our political leadership is terrible. Our spiritual religious leadership is terrible. And the country is a complete and utter mess. And not only that, but there's a lot of concerns, especially if people have children or grandchildren. They're worried about the future of the country because we're getting taken over by this communist agenda. You have the rise of radical Islam, which is basically Islam. And we're seeing the demographic replacement of the native English people who I think in 10, 20 years time could potentially be a minority. Even people being born now are starting to almost overtake the native English being born. So there are plenty of concerns in the present and in the future, and it can be a very depressing thing. But that's why it is important to always have an eternal perspective and the importance of knowing the God the Father and Christ, the truth of Christ and his Spirit. And it's important not to get too caught up in the physical world, because ultimately we are spirits rather than fleshly bodies. And as long as you live in that space in Christ, you're never going to be overly depressed by anything in this world. And it's something I always say to people who get too obsessed with materialism. People who are obsessed with money or anything of this world, I'll always say to them, well, what's your plan for 1,000 years' time? And that question always brings them back into the perspective, because they know in 1,000 years they're going to be dead. So everything that they're obsessed about in this world is basically a waste of time. And the moral of that question and that story is that no matter what you do in this world, it is absolutely pointless from an egotistical perspective. Now, here's the kicker. From a spiritual perspective, there is meaning. So everything we do in this world has extreme purpose, as long as it resonates with, or because it resonates with the eternal soul. And that's why, instead of focusing on money and fame and success or the physical pleasures, there's no purpose in that. What we should be focusing on is Christ and the Father and our eternal spirit. You know, the things that do matter and do have meaning are how much love we give to the world, how we evolve our soul, how forgiving you can be, how wise you can become, and essentially how much you can serve God the Father and Christ's Spirit rather than your ego. And if we transfer that into nationalism debate or a view on nationalism, because as with everything in this world, if you do it from the right spirit, it will be good. If you do it without the spirit and you do it from the place of ego, it will end up bad. So when it comes to nationalism, if you understand from a spiritual perspective that everything's eternal and that we're spirits and that ultimately we shouldn't be too obsessed with a nation because it just happens to be a place we're born. And if you believe in the spirit and eternal perspective, you may be born into multiple lifetimes. You may be born English this lifetime, you may be born African next lifetime, Chinese another lifetime. So from an eternal perspective, you shouldn't be too obsessed with the flesh. And even if you believe in the Christian or Islamic perspective that you only live one life and this is a test, even then you shouldn't be worried about your nation, because you don't want to sell your soul out for your flesh and do evil in the name of your nation, which is going to banish your soul to hell. Even though I don't believe in that perspective, I believe more in the spiritual perspective. We are made in the image of God, which is the spirit, which represents Christ, and that it is eternal. And that I don't believe in the theory that Jesus was a blood sacrifice and that God's an angry God who's going to banish people to hell. I believe God the Father is a loving God and that our spirit of Christ lives in this world, and that it may go through multiple lives to clear certain karmas and return to the loving Father. That makes far more sense than, you know, the story of Jesus having to be a blood sacrifice. But we'll save that for another video. And the point I'm making is that we shouldn't be obsessed with nationalism from a fleshly point of view. However, from a spiritual perspective, knowing we know Christ's spirit and the love that that has, we also have a duty to serve the nation that we're born into, or that we live in as well. So whilst I, as an Englishman, know that I've been born again, so I am a spirit of Christ, that comes first. I also have a moral duty to my nation, just as I have a moral duty to my family. Just because I'm a spirit doesn't mean that I abandon my family. It says even in the Bible, you're honored to serve your mother and father. And in the same way, I'm obliged to serve my nation. But I serve my nation using the power of the Spirit of Christ, first and foremost. And when you do that, you serve it with grace and wisdom. Now, the problem we have with the ethno-nationalists and all sort of supremacists, when you see white supremacists, black supremacists, one thing they all have in common is they're very shallow. They sort of have a lot of hate. So their nationalism is based on not loving their own and having love for other people. It's based on hating all the immigrants. I'm going to deport every single immigrant. But they handle it purely from the physical. The same with Adolf Hitler. His nationalism was based on hatred and evil and warped views of, skin color and nationalism and all that stuff. And all these nationalists are rooted firmly in the physical, and they're shallow, and they have no spiritual knowledge, or they end up like Hitler, because I've been studying a lot of Hitler from Tick History. It's quite worth following his videos, but he had spiritual views, but they were weird, bizarre spiritual views. So just because somebody's spiritual doesn't necessarily mean that they're good. They have to have the Spirit of Christ. That's what I've learned. I'm not a Christian, but I still follow the Spirit of Christ. And by Christ's fruits, you'll know that they're love, rather than weird. A lot of spiritual practices are also born out of hate. And I think with Hitler, this Tick History was saying he was he believed in a form of Gnosticism. And there's loads of spiritual practices. I mean, even look at Islam. Islam is essentially a sort of a spiritual practice, but its fruits do not bear well. It basically causes a lot of anger. You see how they treat non-Muslims. That's essentially in the same way that evil nationalists like Hitler treated non-people from their nation or race. So if you do anything without the Spirit of Christ, it's bad. Whether you're rooted firmly in the physical and you don't have no spiritual awareness, or you follow a spiritual path that is not of Christ, or is anti-Christ and anti the love of the Father, such as in Islam, where they talk about hate the disbelievers and all that stuff. So nationalism has to be based on the Spirit of Christ. And that is essentially why I've set up the Christ of England. It's the ultimate dream team, because we need to protect and serve England and the United Kingdom, but we must do it with the power of the Spirit of Christ. So we can use, for example, the immigration problem. We can use the Spirit of Christ to have wisdom on the situation. So Christ is firm and fair. So we would be firm and fair. So we would think about, an example would be to, first and foremost, kick out all the illegals. They broke the law, so they will have to go. You'd probably look at banning Islam. So you would invite all Muslims to leave because they wouldn't be allowed to practice their religion. Or they would be encouraged to come to Christ instead. Just as in Muslim countries, that's how they treat non-Muslims. And then you'd cut all benefits for foreign people. So that would eventually cause a load of other people to leave, because most economic migrants come here for free money. So as soon as you cut out all the benefits, they'd all leave. And then you'd encourage all people who do not love and respect the country to go back to their homelands. And you could organise even people to be paid. Because basically, once you get rid of our elites, steal all their assets because they've been corrupt, and then you could encourage people, like all these Afghanistan people were here, you basically pay them to go back as well, encourage them. And it wouldn't be from the taxpayers, it would be from, the Tony Blair, he was responsible for Iraq and Afghanistan. So if we've got any Afghanistan refugees, they could be paid from the Tony Blair Foundation, who would have their assets seized for corruption. So we'd say to them all, yes, the war was messed up. So as a way of sorting it out, we'll pay you money to go back home. And then We would slowly encourage the native people to have more children because there'd be more money, and we'd sort the economy out. And then we'd leave a small amount of places for the good migrants who can stay and who we can welcome, who serve our country and who love our country. That would be a plan to do it with grace, not these ridiculous ideas of we need to remove every single person who's not English, even all the mixed race. It's just stupid and moronic. Okay, so that's the point of my video today. If you like what I'm talking about and this makes sense to you, subscribe to this channel, Christ of England, because with Christ we can sort out all our problems. Like the video if you like it, comment below if you've got any comments, and share it with as many people to let them know that only Christ can save England and the United Kingdom and even the world. God bless everybody today. Goodbye.